Good morning. I call to order the Lake Havasu Metropolitan Planning Organization Executive Board meeting on Tuesday, April 9th, 2024 at 10 a.m. If you'd please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item 3 is our roll call. Ms. Lojewski, if you please call the roll.
Thank you. Cal Sheehy,
Here.
Buster Johnson,
Here.
Nancy Campbell,
Here.
Gary Knight,
Present.
Jenny Koch. Here. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Item 4 is our call to the public. This is where citizens have an opportunity to address the executive board on issues within the jurisdiction of the planning area. Comments are limited to 5 minutes, and you can make your way to the podium. Would anyone like to address the board during call to the public? Seeing none, we'll close the call to the public. Item 5 is our meeting minutes from our December 12th, 2023 meeting, and also our March 28th, 2024 meeting. Is there any discussion? Entertain a motion.
Mayor, Chairman, I motion to approve the minutes from the executive board meeting held on December 12th, 2023 and March 28th, 2024.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Campbell, a second from Mr. Knight. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Moving on to item 6 is our carbon reduction program project approval. Mr. Hembry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you'll recall, the last several years we've had discussions on the carbon reduction program, and that was for projects to reduce CO2 emissions. So the MPO released a call for projects in November of last year, and the city has submitted the State Route 95 multi-use path, what we're calling upgrades. Upgrades would include improvements such as crack seal, chip seal, and some kind of top coat. And as far as the overall price for that, we're basically taking all of our pooled funds from the last several years, plus our apportionments going into FY25 for a grand total of $456,106 in federal funds and roughly $27.5 for local match. And that was what was presented to the TAC and approved during our TAC meeting. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman, but we're basically using all of our CRP funds to improve SR 95 as far as we can and as long as we can. As far as scoping, that's once we turn that over to ADOT to administer and they do an on-call, they would get with the local agencies and see what areas may need the most improvements. And then again, those improvements would basically not a resurfacing, but something to improve the path and keep it as up to status of good repair.
Excellent. Are there any questions from members of the board for Mr. Hembry on this item? Hearing none, this is a public hearing. Would anyone like to address the board on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the board for discussion or possible motion. Yeah, Councilmember Koch.
Motion to approve the carbon reduction program project as presented.
Second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Koch and a second from Councilmember Campbell. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item 7 is our HSIP call for project list approval. Mr. Hembry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. ADOT has released their FY27 to 28 call for projects for the Highway Safety Improvement Program in January of 2024. Again, we've worked with Greenlight Traffic Engineering for several years to do our data analysis, our crash data analysis. And again, it'd be that same process where they scrub the data, they look at it, they make recommendations to the local agencies as what potential projects they would like to pursue for applications. Mike and his team presented at the last TAC meeting several projects of interest that were approved by the TAC to move forward into the application phase. So we're not full application yet, just here's what we've identified through the crash data. Those projects for Lake Havasu City would be McCulloch Boulevard. There's been several fatal pedestrian crashes along the Birch Square As far as what we're considering is more of a striping application, potentially not really a raised sidewalk, but more of the in-the-ground LEDs or something to bring awareness to those intersections. So higher visibility striping, maybe some in-ground LEDs, some of those types of countermeasures. So nothing that would raise or cause any kind of drainage issues, nothing along the corridor that would ruin the aesthetics, if you will. So any improvements that Mike and his team would recommend would be installing on existing poles or lights and something that would be aesthetically pleasing, no hawk signals, nothing along those lines, mainly in-ground and mainly intersection. We're looking at, here it says North Palo Verde to Lake Havasu Avenue, but from Mulberry, but we're actually looking from Mesquite to Acoma after conversations with the TAC, from going to those intersections, again, looking at more of a intersection improvements with striping and awareness. The other project was North Palo Verde and Lake Havasu Avenue. There was fatal left turn pedestrian crashes. After conversations with the engineers, they want to pursue a traffic signal at that intersection. But first we have to do what they call a warrant study, look at the traffic patterns, look at the traffic volumes to see, does it warrant that? We've already started that process thanks to Dan Castle and to Tyler Fonte, the traffic techs. They have already collected that data, and we just sent that off to Mike and his team to say, here's the turning movements, here's the volumes. They're going to do a full-blown, what we call a MUTCD traffic signal warrant, and if it warrants a signal, we're going to pursue an application for that, and very much what we did at the McCulloch and Jamaica intersection. So hopefully, fingers crossed, because if we can get that application and that award, that's 100% federally funded. So we're real hopeful on that. From Mojave County, it was London Bridge Road. Mainly around the Crystal Beach area is what we're looking at, but there's been a few run-off the road motorcycle crashes after discussions with Mr. Latowski and Sergio, their engineers. They're looking to widen the shoulder from basically that Crystal Lake area to SR 95, where it's right now it's just the lanes and then there's not much shoulder. So improve the shoulder, include some bike striping to match what's already existing on London Bridge from Crystal Drive in towards the city. So now just making those improvements all the way to SR 95. And then on ADOT, we were working with the district. There's from milepost 178 to 180, there's been a lot of fatal rear end crashes, which is not good, especially for this town and the types of volumes that we get. So we're looking at what they call a dynamic dilemma zone, and that's more of, I don't know if you've ever been on those high-speed scenarios where you're coming into a lower speed and there's a warning that flashes that lets you know that the signal's about to change. And so they're looking at that and working with the district to see if that application would be warranted. So that's what we've identified through this round of safety applications. Here in the next few months, timeline-wise, Mike and the team are looking to get those applications created to the locals to sign off on, and then applications due to the MPO May 1st. So next 3 to 4 weeks, those are the applications that the TAC has agreed to move forward with. This was just an informational update to you all to let you know what's happening moving forward. And again, hopefully applications due in May, and we should hear August, December timeframe. ADOT is actually doing a little something different this year. They're actually going to hire consultants to take a look at the scopes of these projects to make sure that they're vetted properly and that we don't get into a scenario in the future where the cost estimates are unrealistic and they have to come back to the agencies for more money. So that's what we're looking at timeline-wise. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hembry. Yes, you included the call for projects timeline, and you indicate on May 1st, as you just mentioned, that the draft applications are due. The responsible agency looks like Greenlight, local agencies, and the MPO. What's the MPO's role, and how are we going to make sure we don't miss that deadline with kind of the staff change?
Sure. So the way it's worked in the past is Greenlight does the application basically 100%, and he sends that application to review for the local agencies, and there's a cover page they basically print on their letterhead, they sign off on, and I will be putting this all in an email to Mr. Foggin and Mr. Knutson before the end of the week of here's the next step for HSIP and some of these other projects. Then they sign off on it. They say yes, they sign the application. That entire packet then comes to the MPO, and we basically forward it to the state. There's just a rule, there's a caveat that the applications have to be submitted by the MPO. We've worked with Larry Talley and Carrie and Mona at the ADOT level and traffic safety section. They're very good and accommodating of sometimes Mike will submit it and he'll CC us and we simple email like, yep, this is our official submittal. Please accept this as as the MPO submittal for HIP applications for this call for projects.
Okay.
And that's why I'll make sure I'll work with Sarah as well and Ron and Jess to make sure that those applications, and again, Mike is very good at 100% sending the packet, and it's more of just a sign the cover page, reprint it, attach it to the packet, and get it back to the MPO.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are there any other questions from members of the board for Mr. Hembry?
Chairman, just
Yeah.
one question. How close is this to the Anderson Chrysler turnoff issue where we have had some rear ends there? Is this the same location? Do you know where I'm talking about on Highway 95 going northbound?
No, so this is towards the south, towards that curve where it starts to curve. Right in and around that curve is where milepost 178 to 180
Water
is,
Safety Center.
down in that area. And that's mainly that you see those high speeds coming in from like the park or courtside area, slowing down. So if their traffic's queued up from a red light situation, but somebody's coming in at high speeds, that's usually what causes the rear ends, which it's typical. You would see that, on the north end, way outside of town towards the end of the mall, or towards the south end. And this is more towards the south end. And that little stretch, that 4 mile stretch is mainly where these are happening.
Have we had any conversations in regards to that turnoff right there where you turn on to the Anderson Chrysler Toyotas? You have Lowe's right after that. They do have a turning lane, but Anderson's doesn't. And that does cause a lot of problems right there too. Is there some way we can take a look at that technology for that location? Like just reminding people that beware, there's no turning lane ahead of us, that you may want to merge left around, if you're going to go straight. Just a thought.
Yeah. There's a couple of conversations going on. One, we're working on a turn lane into the Anderson Jeep dealership, the Chrysler dealership, with ADOT. And then later in our agenda, actually at the TIP amendments, you'll see some traffic stuff over in that area. So we'll talk about that in the next agenda item.
Oh, so it'll be in the next.
Yeah, there's an update on one of the amendments for a raised median from South Palo Verde to Acoma, I believe it is, and then again from North Palo Verde out to Lake Drive in that area. So that same area we're talking about.
Okay.
So
we are
talking about not the same thing, not the dilemma.
not the call for projects, right?
Not the dilemma. What do you call that? That was a new word for me.
That might hit me with that one too. The dynamic dilemma zone.
Yes. Okay.
We used to just call it a queue warning as cars queues up, and they just let them know, hey, you're coming to, congestion up ahead, and there's a stop. But I guess it's a dynamic dilemma zone is the new phrase for that one.
Yeah. So first time I'm hearing that word, but so yeah, not that, but that we can see this, and then if that still sees and on the north end, we can have that conversation.
Okay, great.
At a future
Thank you.
time.
I just
Yes.
want to make sure that's addressed maybe sooner than later. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from members of the board for Mr. Hembry on this item? All right, we'll move on to item 8, which is the fiscal year 2024 TIP amendments. Mr. Hembry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So every year annually, our TIP typically covers 4 to 6 years, but then annually, we like to bring it back to the board of any administrative amendments. Formal amendments will come before you as needed throughout the year. But then again, at the end of the year, we like to wrap it up before we send it to the public to just cover every single change that's been made to that TIP during FY24 so we can post it and start fresh in FY25. That way there's not a bunch of highlighted and crossed out. We make those changes and start fresh each and every year. So for FY24, the first administrative amendment were our 5310, which are our nonprofit transit agencies. Those are non-public, those are private. That's the New Horizons, if you will, those nonprofit agencies. And there's five awards, and they were awarded sometime last year, calendar year. I won't go through every award, but basically this is their capital and operation awards. They have to be placed on a regional tip because they're FTA, because they're federal funds. So it helps track where those funds are going and where they're coming to. So part of their grant is just putting on your regional tip. So that's what those projects are. The second administrative amendment was for the Transportation Alternative Project. As we've gone through in the past, the MPO applied for that scoping for safe routes to school. We were awarded. Once that's awarded, it goes from that parking lot status to it has to be programmed into the tip. But it's administrative because it's a grant. It has no bearing on our appropriated or apportionments for the region. It's a grant. So we are allowed to move that from unawarded to awarded status as administrative because it has no fiscal constraint impact. The third administrative amendment was for the highway safety improvement projects. There were a few changes, not the ones we just discussed in the last item. This was actually projects that were already awarded from FY 25 and 26. There was a few changes. The State Route 95, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, the raised median project, there was a project cost increase from 3.4 million up to 4 million. So anytime that there's an additional cost, we have to note that and change that. And then for the Horizon 6 Gold Springs area, they just changed a simple name in the name description of how it was named. But more importantly, and we've discussed this with Mr. Letowski and the engineers, is to deliver the overall 5-year project at ADOT, the 5-year construction plan. Because of some of these overages, they had to move some of those lower scoring HSIP projects. They had to reschedule construction just to make sure they can fund their 5-year program this year. So this project for us, the Horizon 6 construction, got pushed back from FY 26 to 27. The cost didn't change. They didn't halt the project. It's still ongoing and still in design as we speak. They just rescheduled the construction phase so they can fund other projects that were already ongoing and in the construction phase. With that, and then also on here, and we will add these before we take it to ADOT. Administratively, we will also, for HSIP, we'll add these other projects that we mentioned, those other applications. That's part of that FY 27 and 28. Make sure that those HSIP projects are in a parking lot unawarded status before we send in the applications. And then for administrative amendment number 4, this is for the 5307, which is the public transit. This is Jeanette and Patrick, the local transit system, and this is just a long list of projects that they have removed, that they have added, funding that's either decreased or increased, few project changes, and then some other MISC overall. But they have to work with the MPO just to put their projects on their tip. Again, to track, we have no say or control. They go through city council. They go through their own processes as far as vetting and approval of where they spend their funds and how they spend their funds. They just have to work with the MPO to put those on our tip so we can track that regionally of where FTA is sending those dollars. And then the last amendment, which was formal, was the one that we just approved under item number 6 for the carbon reduction program, as you all just approved, was to officially place that CRP project on the tip. And this is just, again, a memo showing that we added that recently, as of today, to the tip for the total of 456. And with that, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, that is all the administrative amendments and formal amendments we have in FY24. If approved today, we would take this out for public comment for 45 days. If any major changes happen, we would bring it back to the board. In my experience, the last 10 years, we've never had any major comments that would affect a project. So we'll send it out for 45 public comment period, and then by July 1, we will send this to ADOT with a letter letting them know this is the changes, which they're already aware of these. Mm-hmm. Again, it's just annually we like to wrap this up and say, here's our tip in its entirety going into FY25. Everything's clean and ready to go.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hembry. Are there any questions or comments from members of the board for Mr. Hembry?
Yes, Chairman. Question. Do we have any contingency funding in our Lake Havasu City budgets that do these matches? Because as I go through the budget, I do not see anything where there's like a flat contingency fund that when these matches come up that for the exact MPO projects, do we have that? And if not, where does this match come from?
Sure. Yeah. So in Lake Havasu City's operating budget, all of these dollars are accounted for. So all of our local matches with everything that's in the tip is already in our budget. So it's not necessarily a capital improvement project because it's an MPO project, but the local matches are in the operating budget for public works in that account. So we can detail it out for you, but certainly Justin or Mr. Hembry, you wouldn't have that information because that's a local match from like Havasu City's budget. So
correct.
Yes.
And as far as the CRP project, that one's not even scheduled for FY25. So that could be I know we're in budget season, so that could be something you would take a look at as far as CRP is the only project that we just formally approved. Outside of that, and even then, you're not on the hook until you sign the IGA, and City Council has to sign IGA. So in the past, I believe it was Mr. Frosley would bring those contracts before you and say, here's the color of federal funds. Sometimes there's no match because it's a safety project and it doesn't require a match unless there's an overage, or it's a STBG or a CRP type fund. And here's the match and here's what we're expected. And then at that point, Hopefully it would be in the general budget, but if not, that's something that would be approve or deny based on availability of local match funds. And even then, once you sign the IGA, as long as you have the project initiated, I would say by beginning to middle of third quarter of that fiscal year that it's programmed in, you should be okay.
Yeah, and some of the projects also do in-kind contributions. So some of that is taken into account too. So there's not actually dollars for the local match.
And for that, Mr. Chairman, for clarification, the only in-kind we can use, so the MPO itself, Sarah and I, for planning projects, studies, scoping, we can use in-kind. But for the city and the local agencies, if it's design and construction, unless it's 100% federal because it's safety or it's a HERF exchange, there's always some sort of cash match. Now, what that percentage is, typically it's 5.7, but most if not all federal design and construction projects have a cash hard match, and that's part of that IGA, and they will identify that, and ADOT will send you that IGA and that contract, and you know exactly that dollar amount as of that day. Again, future, when they put it out to bid, there may be overages, and you'll have to work on either finding additional funds or coughing up more cash match, but that's where that's identified. I mean, and we do have that in the CRP as far as on the tip, you can look and see which projects have local match. And the project sponsor is the key there. If it's the MPO sponsoring, and we can only sponsor studies, researches, scoping, MPOs and COGS cannot sponsor design and construction projects. We're not allowed to federally.
Right.
We can only go up to scoping. So for us, we're allowed to capture in kind, but for the local agencies, it's always going to be a cash match. And then as far as how much, that will be indicated on the tip. And then there's time throughout the process once it's initiated or after initiation, an IGA. And then again, that's more time that city council and this board will have to look at those and say, do we have it? Yes or no? Do we need to postpone this? Do we need to schedule this back another year until we can get that local match? And that's all up to the agency.
What I've heard over the past couple of years of learning all of this is that we need to have project-ready projects, like sitting on the counter, just ready to go. Vision projects of what we think we need to have so that when we have grant funding coming down, they're ready to go, like job ready to go. I know that traffic studies can change, we got to update, but the vision of having projects in place and not to mention having potential matching funds available for grant writers to know exactly that Lake Havasu City has the MPOs back if we are prepared. And what I'm finding out is preparation is the key here, and we're missing that a little bit. And I'd love to see how we can improve upon that, including the TAC. And we have grant writers now that we didn't have. We're tapping into federal funding more now than we ever have in the history of Lake Havasu City. So all I'm asking moving forward is to make sure our MPOs, whoever it is, has project-ready projects 2 years in advance that they know they can pull off the table and have it ready to go, along with a potential contingency funding for them to know that they are going to take the time and the energy to move forward on these grants and get them done. That's my request right today. Mm-hmm. So instead of, like he said, sometimes we have to push these projects back. The first thing, Chairman, you bring up a lot is the MPO's projects take so long. ADOT projects take so long. What I'm hearing, though, is ADOT and the State Transportation Board is having conversations right now on how they can expedite some of these projects, but they're at local MPOs and their local municipalities to step up and be more ready for them as well. So that's my statement / on that. Thank
And
you.
the recommendation, like a good practice, I wouldn't say the best, but a good practice is trying through your general fund to set aside the funds for just to match the MPO apportionments, the STBG and the CRP, that you know that's funding coming in through formula funding. It's guaranteed. That for sure, try to set that aside during your budgeting process. Now, as far as the big mega grants, and this is kudos to RTAC and the legislators, that smart fund, that AZ smart fund where they're setting aside, tens of millions of dollars and they're for rural, for urban, they know, they recognize that is the challenge, is coming up with that local cash match. It's very hard once you get to these big mega grants. So that I would definitely encourage, and that's a local agency thing as well, is if you're going after not a state grant, but a federal grant, the infras and the raises, these bigger these bigger grants or the rural, the safe routes for all, those types of grants, to apply first at the state for that matching fund through the AZ Smart Grant. And that what that is doing is securing, say you have a $25 million project, but you need $5 million to match. You go to that AZ Smart for that $5 million with promises to then go apply for those bigger federal grants. So, your local grant administrators definitely have them, reach out and review and look at the AZ Smart Grant through the legislators and apply for that if you're going for a big federal grant. And obviously those are much more competitive. So for Havasu, I think we've done very well the last several years to go after the state grants through the Highway Safety Improvement Program or now the Transportation Alternative Program. But there are, to your point, Nancy, Mrs. Campbell, is that there are cash match involved with these. So then it's, yes, what through the long range plans or through local general plans or city plans, what projects are of interest, and then what does that dollar amount look like if it's federalized, and then what does that look like match-wise for the locals?
Thank you. I appreciate the update on that and the direction, because again, as we move forward, if we have a contingency, I don't know, $5 million in an investment account, we don't have to use that money, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it will only if we have an IGA or something that comes before
Right,
council.
but I believe that as Lake Havasu City grows and we're going to have bigger, more expensive projects coming down the road, we're going to need some of these smart grants to help us out.
Yes.
So, all right, thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions for members of the board on this item? All right. This is a public hearing. Would anyone like to address the board on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the board for a motion or discussion.
Mayor or Chairman, I
Yes.
motion to approve the FY 2024 TIP update.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a motion from Councilmember Campbell, a second from Councilmember Koch. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right, moving on to item 9 is the fiscal year 2024 loan. Mr. Hembry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, technically our federal funds for our surface transportation block grant and our carbon reduction program are what they consider a use it or lose it by the end of the year. Well, technically through the loan process that we've done year after year, we can, I hate to say the word carry forward, but through the loan structure that ADOT has set up, we can loan those funds to ADOT or to other COGS or MPOs with repayment in future years. And that's just a way that's that vehicle that we can carry those funds forward. And that way we can zero balance out and not leave any money on the table. So for this year, for FY24, we're taking all of our STBG, loaning it to ADOT with repayment in FY25. FY25, we're looking to fund any improvements that we find from our signal plan, our modeling and study plan. So that's already in the tip. It's there. So we just need to continue strategically to move our STBG forward. So we're looking at 288,529 in STBG. And then for CRP, we have that pooled amount, that 336. That's what we've had. It just keeps snowballing and rolling forward year after year. So that's what we're loaning forward. That 336 combined with what we'll have next year will fund that 456. So that this is just the loan to move FY24 funds over into next year. So total with the 288 in STBG and 336 in CRP, our total is going to be 625, 233.14. And we've already worked these figures out with ADOT Finance, and we all agreed to the penny. This is exactly what we're carrying forward. And this is just the formal approval to do so, Mr. Chairman, and happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Embry. Yeah, so it's kind of an awkward way to do this. It's called a loan, but it really is just the mechanism that provides the opportunity for carry forward so that we can create enough money to be able to get the projects done that we've identified as a priority. So,
And Mr. Chairman, just as an update too for the board moving forward, there's a rule at ADOT, we call it the 3+1. As far as pulling funds, you can really only do 3 years plus one. So in that fourth year, if you're going to pull STBG or CRP, by the time you get to the fourth year, you really want a project programmed and these allocated to that and to start the process. Otherwise, not the entire amount of funds would be swept, but that first year because the clock starts. And by the time you get to the fourth year, they want to see, the feds want to see, and the state wants to see, like, why are these funds inactive? Okay, if you're pulling them, you can only pull them for so long. what's the plan to spend them. So if there's just no plan and they're kind of floating out in the ether, that is a problem. So just please be mindful of the 3+1. But for us, it's our traffic signal ITS project that we're going to HERF exchange in the future. And we've identified that, it's programmed, and now we just have to kick those funds into FY26.
Yeah,
Or
thank you.
25, excuse me.
Okay, so in the documentation they provide, because of the word loan, there are no costs to do this. There's no interest
No,
gain.
yeah,
or-
this
so
is
it's
not
just
like a bond. I
neutral.
know, and that's
Yes.
what you see local agencies. Are we bonding out? No.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just a neutral. We're carrying those dollars forward.
Correct.
Excellent. Are there any questions from members of the board for Mr. Hembry? All right, seeing none, this is a public hearing. Would anyone like to address the board on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the board for recommendation, motion, questions.
Chairman,
Yeah, Councilmember Koch,
motion?
please.
Motion to approve the fiscal year 2024 loan as presented.
Second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Koch, a second from Councilmember Campbell. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, we're ready to vote. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right, the next item is item 10, which is our fiscal year 2024 work program budget amendment. Mr. Hembry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So part of the planning process and the federal process is functional classified. Is how is the road classified functionally? Is it a minor collector above? This is all dealing with traffic patterns and traffic volumes. And the feds require local agencies to collect that data through traffic counters. Last year, we approved about $25,000 to buy what we called plate counters. This year, the request, the technicians came back and said a lot of our radar counters, these are more of a permanent install. Typically, tubes or plate counters count anywhere from like a 48-hour to maybe a 72-hour count. They're more of a deployment that you can be nomadic with these counters. You can place them wherever you want. That's what they did on the study for Palo Verde and Lake Havasu Avenue. But the radar counters are meant to collect more of 365 days a year situation with a few battery swaps to get your seasonal traffic, to develop patterns and to see patterns. We have radar counters on McCulloch at the bridge so we can see that seasonal traffic and the winter traffic, summer traffic. Long story short, the last time radar counters were purchased was back in 2012. So a lot of these things are a decade old. There's not as much support for the hardware and even the software. So they're looking to just upgrade to new radar counters. We've got quotes. And we have the MPO has the budget. We're looking to spend roughly $40,000 in SPR. We, the MPO, typically save and pool our SPR funds for long range plans, but we do have enough on the books to assist the city at no cost to them to purchase through our SPR funds some more radar counters. So we would be looking at, I believe it was 8 to 9 radar counters in the sum of $40,000. But to do that, we have the money in the budget, but because it wasn't in the work program, we have to go and put that as a line item in the work program of here's where we'd like to make that purchase, and then amend that through the TAC and through the executive board. So that's what we're looking at is amendment number 1 for FY 24 to 25 Unified Planning Work Program is to purchase and utilize $40,000 to upgrade the radar traffic counters for the city of Havasu at no cost to them.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any questions from members of the board for Mr. Hembry on this item? Seeing none, this is a public hearing. Would anyone like to address the board on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for discussion or possible motion.
Chairman, motion
Yes.
to approve the 24-25 Unified Planning Work Program UPWP Amendment Number 1. Wait, am I on the wrong one?
No,
Yes.
that's correct.
That's correct.
Yes, thank you. All right, we have a
Sounds right.
motion. Do we have a second? We have a motion from Councilmember Campbell, a second from Councilmember Koch. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item 11 is our project status update. Mr. Hembry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to ADOT for providing this project update report. And they have been very good about providing this to the TAC. I just wanted to provide this to the board to let you know where we're at with existing projects. For the Lake Havasu MPO Safe Routes to School Scoping Project, they have awarded that to one of their local on-call consultants, and they are working on a draft IGA, but that IGA is going to be with the MPO, and we've already sent our letter of commitment for match to be in kind, and they've accepted and said that that's, so this is one of those projects where in kind is suitable, and the MPO will work with the locals that as reports come out, working papers, those types of matters that will be distributed to the TAC and the executive board, and in kind for your time for review and comment would be captured on that project. So still early in the works. They haven't kicked that off yet, but again, 8 schools looking to scope any kind of ADA or sidewalk improvements, and they just had the kickoff meeting, so nothing has been really established yet. And I gave all the key contacts of the city to the consultant team to let them know to please work with Mr. Knudsen and Foggin and Ms. Lajewski and any of the other school districts as well to start. They're just now getting that stakeholder list built and starting to gather all the folks to kick off the project. As far as Lake Havasu City projects, the McCulloch Boulevard and Jamaica Boulevard signal, that is advertised. That is scheduled for advertisement here in about 10 days. So we're excited for that. Hopefully the bids come in at cost. I know we've been working hard on this project. And thankfully for ADOT, we moved heaven and earth to move those grant funds from the, I believe it was Swanson and Tacoma over to McCulloch and Jamaica. So we're very excited to see this one hopefully come in at bid or under bid. So that's where they're at for that. We're looking to advertise. Swanson Avenue, again, advertising. They advertised in January. Stanley Consultants has been on board. We've had a few meetings. This is the Swanson over by the Wing Loop in Mariposa. Not a lot of improvements. They're really just looking to do, again, some high visibility crosswalks, maybe some advanced warning on the stop signs, maybe even change the stop signs to the flashing LEDs to let them know, because we have had several accidents in the past kind of along that corridor, especially as they're building more of those multifamily unit homes and apartment complexes in that area. There's a lot of foot traffic going into Safeway and that shopping center. So they had already taken care of one of those intersections with high flashing rapid, beacons and the sidewalks. They're just looking to improve those others coming into Swanson and improve awareness that that's a T intersection. The other project that was HSIP and it hadn't kicked off was the systemic speed feedback sign. Again, they just kicked this project off. Stanley Consultants, they're having conversations with the district. They're going to start reaching out to the locals to just say, okay, where do we want to put these things? Right now, just the general foundational conversation is these need to go either where existing regulatory speed limits were at, or they need to go into areas where speeds are coming from higher speeds to lower speeds. So if it's a 45 down to a 35, the consultants have been tasked with looking at those zones and making those recommendations. There was 10 corridors with 4 signs on each corridor. So, and again, that project's already funded, awarded. They're now into the design phase and kickoff phase. So the local agency should be hearing from Stanley Consultants shortly. The Mojave County project was the Gold Springs Road. Again, unfortunately, with everything that was going on, they're in design, but that project, I know we show in here that they're waiting for an IGA to be executed and some of these other things, and that is true, but construction unfortunately got pushed back from FY26 to 27. So it's still moving along. IGA's waiting for the match. They're working on the scoping, working on the design phase, but construction did get pushed back one fiscal year, unfortunately. And then last but not least, that pending project that we've been talking about is our HERF exchange. That's the traffic signal ITS. Based off of what Kimley Horn produces in our implementation plan for the MPO here in the next 12 to 16 months, that's what's really going to drive what hardware needs to be purchased, what short, mid, and long-term improvements need to be made, and at what cost. And then we can decide as a region with those HERF exchange dollars in FY25, FY26, where's the most impact, or at least what short-term improvements can we do, and then how do we leverage other funds and other grants in the future to take care of the midterm to long-term recommendations. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think the only other project that has come in that's not on this list, and it was congressional directed spending, Ms. Vegette reached out, and they do have a project that they just applied for, I believe, some improvements. I'd have to go back and look at the exact area, but I believe it was on Acoma and Mesquite, and it was just looking for ADA, just strictly ADA improvements. So I'm not sure where that was at. I believe it was $6 million of requests and improvements for congressional directed spending for those 2 corridors. So it's on the tip, but it's in parking lot status. We just put it on, and I believe the city is going to apply that through the Senator Kelly's office or Cinema's office through that transportation CDS project. So That's emails only right now. So I don't know where the city's at with that. But with that, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, I'd be happy to answer any other questions with ongoing projects. But other than that, this was just an informational FYI only.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hembry. On the McCulloch and Jamaica traffic signal, what is that time frame? So if everything goes, goes up for advertisement on April 19th, then when will we actually have a traffic signal there?
That's a great question. I'm not sure how long it would take them to install because I don't believe there's too much underground work that they would have to do right there. But and that's just it. I don't know how much underground, how far they would have to go to connect in. I'm not sure the time frame on these typical signal installs, so I don't want to put a hard date on it. So as far as how soon could they get started, I'd say within several months of once they advertise and they get it back. Now, then again, too, once the bid comes in, that will have to go back to State Transportation Board for their approval. I mean, it's going to take a few months for that process. So once that's approved and then they get on board, then they can start. So a few more months, even just to get it approved at the state board level.
Okay. And who coordinates that getting on the state board agenda?
That would be ADOT. They're administering this whole project. Yeah. So ADOT will take that to the board. Just keep an eye on it. I know Mr. Knight's very good at letting us know that if there any time that there's a project that's within our region up for discussion or approval at the board level, he's been very good at letting us know of those projects. So we assume that here, I'm hoping by the June meeting that it would be on the agenda for approval when the bids come in, but I'm not sure how long and what that bid scenario would look like. Whether if it's too high, they may have to rebid or look at the scope. And so we're still several months before like actual shovels on the ground.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Are there other questions for Mr. Hembry?
Yes, Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you for this update. This is really nice to see it in front of us. It really helps a lot. The one that I still have concerned about is the ITS, the traffic signals. Again, going back to what is the synchronization based on Lake Havasu Avenue or Lake Havasu cities and the state? Is this part of the traffic software programs that we're discussing? Is this going to be half Lake Havasu City's responsibility to update theirs? Half responsibility is going to be for ADOT or state highways traffic signals to communicate in the future. Can you explain a little bit more about that? And what will be our responsibility possibly in the next 16 months as Lake Havasu City to make sure we have the best funding and that we're ready to go as well?
Sure, absolutely. So our current, the modeling study that we're having right now, so Kimley is looking at both in conjunction to each other, not just what's best for SR 95, what's best for Lake Havasu, but what's best for both together, operating and coordinating together. So they are putting together signal timing plans to just improve what's already out there, what already exists in the field, to make those timing synchronizations work better. Ultimately, the local agencies can say yes or no. And in the scope of work, what we did was that the Kimley has their IMSA technicians, and they're allowed to work in ADOTs right away and have been working with the locals, that once they turn on those signal timings and adjust, if something's not quite right, they are on the hook by contract to come back and work with both agencies to kind of iron those out and get those what's currently out there working properly. In the future, that's those midterm and long-term recommendations to whether it's radio equipment to get them to talk better, or ultimately maybe tether them in through like a fiber optic situation, which is very expensive. But that's what this HERF exchange is. Short term, we already have Kimley Horn on the ground right now doing inventory, making recommendations. They will have signed by professional traffic operations engineers. Here's what we recommend to do to your timing now. And then here's a list with cost estimates of what we feel would be a low cost, mid cost, high cost, and short term, midterm, long term recommendations to improve your operations. And then that's where this HERF exchange project goes, okay, we have roughly 1.5 to 1.7 million, depending if it's FY26 or 27. Where do we want to spend this? Well, what's the recommendations? What do those dollar amounts look like? And that's where it will be up to the TAC and local agencies. And then as far as responsibilities, ultimately we hope that coordination happens between the district and the city, and I'm sure they would be too. And I'm sure they're happy to, play ball as well. So at the end of the day, we can't force ADOT or the district to do anything on their system, just like they couldn't force you to do anything on your system. But based off the study, that it's going to be here. We had professional traffic operations engineers and consultants take a look at this, and this is the recommendations. How can we play nice? But there is in the future, honestly, someone, and honestly, I think it should be the city. I know that's a bold statement. But when you do traffic operations, if you really want complete ownership of it, especially from industrial to like Mulberry, where the signals are adjacent to each other, that is the ultimate question: is who's responsible? Now, sometimes you can pay for a third party company to come in and to manage your operations of your traffic signals and to kind of take ownership of both through like an IGA or a contract. So there are options to do third party. So ultimately, it depends. Contract wise, you can either try to take ownership of that on your side, or the state may come in and say like, okay, now that we have hardware and software that all works together, maybe they would be willing to, but that would all have to be ironed out between council and local agencies. So again, it just depends. But the recommendations of what to do and how to do it will be made through this modeling study.
And would that be 16 months out before we get this formal document that lets us know which direction we need to go? And if I understand you correctly, you did state that ADOT may come back and say, we don't have a problem with our lighting. We're not going to help you with this project. And is this a good direction for a future appropriation request? And Chair, to answer that question, I'm not sure. I had been told mixed information. One is the appropriations, like for instance, RTAC wants us to use it on local projects. And then I've been told, no, we want to use it on state projects and local projects. And if that's the case, I can't find a better appropriation project for state and local projects coming together than this. So we've been waiting a long time for this. And the last thing I want is any grant funding, federal funding, ADOT not knowing that we are here to play ball with the ADOT and make this happen. So our funding over the next 2 years is quite questionable, and I'm quite concerned about what that's going to look like. So this is just for the study that we are going to get on how we can get better traffic flows that communicate with Lake Havasu City as well. Do you have any recommendations, if you were sitting in my seat today as a city council person going into our budget session, that you would be doing to making sure this is about as smooth as it can go?
And the good news is the HERF Exchange program, as long as they don't get rid of what we call HERF Exchange. So when I say HERF Exchange, STBG dollars, they're there. That is our apportionments. This is not a grant, and I'll have to go check the exact figures, but it's 1.5 million, give or take a couple $100,000. I believe we're on the higher side. I think we'll be approaching the 1.7 if we get into FY27, but the funds are there. And HERF Exchange is to take your STBG dollars and to exchange it 90 cents on the dollar. And then what that does is it defederalizes the project and it gives it to you in HERF dollars. There's still an IGA, but it's not a federal, and there is no local match. The match is it takes more from the MPO coffers, the STBG dollars, but what the locals get is 100% no local match required, because that's what you're getting. You're getting your HERF dollars. So the match is paid for with existing STBG. It's a wonderful program. I wish a lot of people are using it. So that's what we're doing, is we're pulling our STBG and we're pushing it into late FY25, 26. We want to do a HERF Exchange project, but we're doing the study so we know what we can buy with that 1.5 million. But to your point, that 1.5 is probably going to pay for the short-term stuff. The stuff that right now the discussion is there is some what we call like GIS clocks where they can talk to each other. It's not the best technology, but it is good technology, and it's cheap. It's not cheap, but it's affordable. It's inexpensive. But moving forward, if we need a command center, if you will, operations center with monitoring and training of staff and software and all that, you're talking millions and millions of dollars of communications equipment. And then who pays for it and how do they pay for it? And that's where the legislative, that's where that piece of that conversation comes in. So just for clarification, we will have funding secured at least at $1.5 million plus to deliver something.
Thank you. I look forward to that document for sure.
Yeah, and all the conversations I've had with ADOT, the district engineer, and the team, we're in unison. We're doing this together. So I haven't heard any
I haven't heard any
conversation
pushback.
this
They're
isn't
happy
moving
as well.
forward. So, or no one's going to fund their side of it.
Right.
So, yeah, this is a top priority for our area. So that's why we've been focused on it so much. So, all right, any other questions for Mr. Hembry on this item? All right, this is a public hearing. Would anyone like to address the board on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, and that item was just for information. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the Rural Transportation Advocacy Council report. Mr. Adam?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. My camera is not working. It's probably just as well. I'm hopeful you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you. The legislature, I think, is winding down as far as the regular session bills are concerned. We had the oversight committees conduct their last hearings about a week and a half ago. And so they are wrapping up the work on those bills that have cleared through all of those hurdles, such as the committee hearings. And in fact, the legislature has put it on a schedule to where it is only convening on Wednesdays to take the votes on those bills that are remaining. And I think also provide legislative leadership with the opportunity to start to hone in and focus on coming to a budget agreement. And that is, we do have some challenges as far as the budget is concerned. As it stands right now, it's anticipated that we're going to close the current year with a deficit of over 800 million that will need to be addressed in next year's budget. And then looking at baseline revenues and expenditures and how they are projected for the upcoming year, there's an additional deficit of close to 900 million that will also have to be addressed, as the state will need to pass a balanced budget. Now, the governor's office, not quite as pessimistic. They do anticipate a deficit, but the legislature right now is looking at about a 1.7 billion total, where the governor's office thinks it's going to be closer to around 1 billion. And because of those projections and how important they are in setting the budget, Thursday is going to be a huge day. The legislature has what's called the Finance Advisory Committee, which is made up of the state's budget staff, state economists, as well as the universities, and they meet quarterly to provide an update on how they see the budget outlook, both the revenue and expenditure side. And that those quarterly meetings include an April meeting, and that April meeting is always very significant because of the timing it has with the setting of the state budget. So on Thursday, that Finance Advisory Committee is going to meet, and they are going to provide some updated projections on where they see the baseline's going and what's projected, not just for how we close this year. Next year, we'll see some numbers going out 3 and 5 years as well. And those projections are going to be what the legislature uses when it sets targets for the budget. And so once those numbers are released on Thursday, that's really going to, I think, accelerate the ability of the legislature to draft the budget. So we're anticipating that there will be a deficit that they need to address, but it remains to be seen what the extent of that will be. Based on the current information, what I think is also significant is that while there's a deficit anticipated for this year and probably for next, if you were to leave baseline expenditures and revenues to their own and not make adjustments, it's anticipated that about 3 years out, they will correct themselves. And so there's a shortfall for a couple of years, but it's a temporary problem, which means that it probably doesn't warrant any sort of drastic measures to put the budget back on track. And I think that will also be significant if it continues with the Thursday numbers and sort of limiting the spending cuts. Or I think from a transportation perspective, where we're predominantly concerned is what's going to happen with transportation funding. And are they going to try to raid or use HERF revenue to help balance the budget? Right now, again, because I think it's a relatively limited amount that they're going to have to address. And there does appear to be a lot of opposition to taking from transportation to balance the budget. I think we're relatively safe. The governor, in her budget proposal in January, did identify about $420 million in what she was calling clawbacks. And this is funding that had been earmarked for specific projects over the last couple of years, but that funding, for whatever reason, hadn't been encumbered yet. There's a delay in the development of the project, maybe some cost adjustments, but for whatever reason, this is funding that had been appropriated for projects, but not used yet. And she wanted to put that funding on the table. In other words, redirect that funding to the state general fund to help balance the budget, and then restore that funding in future years when that project is ready to advance. And, conceptually, that's better than just taking transportation money. But I think it's still very problematic. And I know the RTAC board has taken the position that if a clawback is going to complicate or delay project delivery, then we are opposed to it. But with that said, I think that some of those clawbacks, probably not to the extent of $420 million, but I think some of those projects are probably going to be on the table when they do start to develop that budget agreement. Unfortunately, I think what this deficit also means is that while we've got our priority project legislation and we're pursuing additional funding for transportation, that one-time revenue is simply not available in this scenario. So we are not hopeful that we'll be securing additional revenue for the infrastructure this year. But I think we've also made a good case and are probably going to prevent them taking from transportation to balance the budget. So that's a fight that we'll continue to have. As far as regular session bills go, we did have a bill, House Bill 2318, that reforms the Arizona Smart Fund, which was created a couple of years ago to help rural communities pursue and use federal competitive grant funding for transportation projects. And that bill has made it to the governor's desk. In fact, it's her last day to act on it in discussing it with their staff. If she doesn't sign it, I think she's at least going to let it into law. And I think that will just enhance and improve that program and its ability to help rural communities. The other big transportation issue that is out there is the continuation of ADOT. As part of the checks and balances that we have between the executive and the legislature, every state agency periodically goes through a sunset review process where they're audited, where there's a legislative hearing that discuss the findings of that audit. They also have the opportunity to talk about the general operations and direction of that agency. And then it culminates with the requirement that the legislature has to pass legislation to allow that agency to continue. And it's typically a very non-controversial relatively easy process when one party controls everything. But when you have split partisan control, there's a lot of potential to politicize. And that's exactly the situation that ADOT finds itself in right now. The agency is set to expire at the end of June. We're literally just a couple of months away from, if we don't get legislation, ADOT will cease to exist, which I think everybody realizes that practically that can't happen. Who's going to, develop and implement the state highway program, who's going to be providing driver's licenses and permits. It's simply ADOT has to continue. But there's a big fight over any measures that would be tacked on to that continuation. And by that, what I mean is, first off, the House has passed a version which provides an 8-year continuation, which is the current length that ADOT is operating under. And it's also a clean continuation. It doesn't provide any requirements or mandates on ADOT and how they operate. Over on the Senate side, the original bill that the Senate introduced was only going to be a 4-year continuation. They had actually talked about reducing it to 2. They have since gone in the other direction, where there's a 5 to 8 range scale, and depending on what level ADOT has implemented the recommendations of the audit report, will determine that length of that continuation. But in addition to that, the Senate version also has a lot of restrictions and mandates that are placed on ADOT, and most of those seem to be directed at concern or opposition to many of the federal transportation laws that are out there. And of course, the federal laws, they are a lot of them. They're very, very much something that could be subject to criticism and opposition. However, another complication is that we have put ourselves in a place to where our state highway construction program is dominated by federal dollars. We haven't modernized or adjusted the state generated transportation revenues in over 30 years. And over that time frame, not only are we drastically underinvesting in our infrastructure, we're also more and more relying on federal dollars to do so. And if you want to continue to use those federal dollars, you have to comply with the federal transportation laws that are attached to their use. And so we're very much concerned that many of these restrictions and prohibitions that are currently in the Senate version of the ADOT continuation bill would complicate ADOT's ability to comply with those federal laws and to continue to be able to use those federal transportation dollars. And so our position is that we want to see a relatively lengthy continuation. We support the 8 years in the House version, and we also want that continuation to be clean. We don't want to complicate or impede ADOT's ability to comply with the federal laws and continue to use that federal funding. But this is an issue that still we haven't reached an agreement on. It's more than likely going to get tied into the budget discussions. It's something that an agreement is going to have to be reached between legislative leadership and the governor. But, we're kind of playing a game of chicken here, and we're only a couple months out from this needing to be resolved. And so I think everybody at the Capitol understands the gravity of the situation, but we need to continue to ramp up the pressure to make sure that this gets resolved. And with that, I think those are the big issues as far as the legislature is concerned. If anybody has any questions.
Thank you for the report, Mr. Adam. Are there questions from members of the board? All right. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Moving to item 13 is the ADOT district report. Mr. Steinberger.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Pretty simple report this month. For the SR 95 paving project, we're anticipating to wrap it up this summer. The Mockingbird Bridge and the Falls Springs Bridge, we're looking at doing the overlay for both of those bridges in a couple of weeks. And then, like I said, we'll be wrapping up the project shortly after that this summer. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you for your report. Are there any questions from members of the board? Yeah, no questions, but I do have a comment. I just want to once again express our appreciation. That project has gone amazing. We have our citizens have had little impact. It's been such a great enhancement. We appreciate the fog seal and the commitment to the bridge work. So thank you so much for all of the work that ADOT has done on that project.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item 14 is the Arizona Transportation Board report to Mr. Knight.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My report also is pretty short this month. There were very few items on the March board agenda for Lake Havasu City. Most was in Mojave County, were Kingman and Bullhead City. There was one big project, $106.5 million for a construction of a new system interchange, Topak and Kingman Highway, I-40. That was awarded by the board to Fisher Sand and Gravel Company. A pretty big deal. They've got 660 working days, so that'll be about a 2-year project. Other than that, there really isn't anything else other than the next transportation board meeting will be next week, next Friday, April 19th in Buckeye. Be the first time we've ever had a board meeting in Buckeye. At least that's what I was told by board member Mick, who is from Buckeye. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Are there any questions from members of the board for Mr. Knight? No? All right. Thank you. Item 15, are there any future agenda items? All right. Now, number 16 is our upcoming meeting schedule. We have the Lake Havasu Metropolitan Planning Organization TAC meeting on May 28th, 2024 at 10 a.m. And then we have the Lake Havasu Metropolitan Planning Executive Board meeting June 11th, 2024 at 10 a.m. Going forward, I believe, Ms. Lojewski, you have reserved the space over at the courthouse going forward for our meetings. Is that where we'll meet? Yeah, perfect. So we'll be meeting going forward. Our meetings will be over at the other location if you are attending in person. And then before we move on to item 17, Mr. Hembry is moving on. We're sad to see you go, but we thank you for your service to Lake Havasu City over the last several years. You've definitely made a great impact on our planning abilities and what we've planned and a direction going forward. We're going to miss you, but we wish you all the best in your new adventure.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. And even though I'm moving on, I'm not technically gone. I've spoken with Sarah, Ms. Lojewski, that if there's any need for me to come back and to join in through Zoom and to provide any historical knowledge, and I've reached out and I've let Sarah know that I'm available for any of the board members, any of the TAC members, and for Sarah, that I definitely want to make sure that these projects continue to move forward, and be more than happy to help and hold phone conversations or Zoom conversations and whatever it may be. And I thank you to this region. Mojave County has been my home for 20 years of my career, and I just appreciate the region. I appreciate the growth and the coordination with yourself and the board members and other members throughout this community. And I'm happy to have left it better than I found it as far as just funding an additional project. So thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to the next chapter, but it's also surreal. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. Best of luck. All right. The next item is a motion to adjourn to executive session pursuant to ARS 38-431-03, Section A. Do we have a motion to
I
do so?
motion to adjourn.